Hello and welcome to Raising Those Spirits. I'm Steve,
I'm Sam.
and we are back after our very short hiatus. Sorry about that. The holidays caught up to me.
It's amazing what happens around Thanksgiving and everything's happening, and you think, you know what? I'm just gonna take this night off.
Yeah, I that was on me. I ended up getting stuck on a work project until late into the night and just could not make it to record. And so
Sh-
here we are.
shockingly, this is not our day jobs.
Yeah,
We both still have to do regular jobs, and we've been doing this podcast for like over 6 months, and we are not millionaires yet.
right? It's been
So,
honestly, we're close to a year. We're
oh my
coming up.
God, is it?
I mean, we started in February. I think our first episode might have come out in April,
Yeah, that sounds right.
but we recorded our pilot in February, I believe.
That's true. So everybody be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this show.
So,
And then somehow we make money?
yeah, because
Is that true?
we have to at least have something going on after a year. Otherwise, you're like, what's going on?
What's this? What is this life? This pod life?
Ah,
How you doing, Steve? That's
I'm
the question.
I'm doing okay. I haven't been doing as spooky recently. I mean, the post-Halloween spooky curve kind of hit really hard this year. I've been really busy at work, so the spookiest thing I've done recently is put away all the Halloween stuff that doesn't live all year round. Just kind of been like packing that up and going through that weird ritual where you're like, what did I miss? What is year round spooky versus like, what am I going to find in a month and be like, oh, I guess you're year round this year because I'm not pulling those boxes out again.
But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in my apartment that is just year-round spooky stuff. A lot of stuff that started as Halloween decorations that is just decor now. I sit next to this little Halloween tree on my desk that is always going to be here. I'm constantly surrounded by skulls and spiders and spooky things.
Yeah, I we have a skull that we normally put out for Halloween, but I put it on something this year and we were like, that is perfect there. That might be year round now. Because I have an old steamer trunk with some like old matching luggage stacked on top of it. That's like the hard cased, like 100-year-old stuff. And it's where we keep all of our board games and stuff. And it kind of takes up a corner and it's a nice aesthetic look. But we put this old looking skull on top and it just really works with the old steamer trunks. And I was like, oh, you live there. That's it. That's perfect. You're done.
Is it a real human skull?
I mean, no, it's like a Home Depot skull from some year where they were putting out like just cool looking ones, but it works.
All right. No body parts in the house. That's probably a solid rule.
Yeah, yeah, I've got antlers in the house. That's the closest we have.
Yeah, that's fair. It's not a people.
It's not a people
Don't have
bone.
people parts. Don't be like Ed Gein. Have like people parts around your house. He's a notorious killer. Spooky.
Spooky podcast knowledge. Oh, so what have you been
No.
up to?
I had an interesting kind of spooky story to tell you, and I thought of this because um daughter was found her way into some of my antique books. I have a small collection of antique books I collected a few years ago that are now a part of my decor. They just, they live on a shelf and they look like old books. I think they look neat. But I had picked this one up at a craft market, like a flea market in Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston a few years ago, and it is called Round Hill Stories. It's from 1866. I've never read it. Again, it just sits on my shelf. But one of the reasons I picked it up, because when I bought it, or when I picked it up and took a look at it, there's an inscription in it that reads, "Oh, Alice, from Mother Todd, December 25th, 1866." I was like, oh, that's so cool. Here this book is. It's still inscribed with this note from the year that it was published. It's like a book of like children's stories from the 1860s. And then on the other side of the interior of the book, there is a book plate, and it says, "This book belongs to," and I'm not going to give you the person's name. Um, because it's a bit more modern. I think it probably dates from the 1960s. Um, it has this great image of a knight on horseback, just this really cool book plate. And I first got it, I looked this person up. I want to be like, oh, person is probably still around this area. I wonder, I should tell him that I picked up his book, and I looked him up, and I found that he had been murdered. It's really upsetting. I laugh at this for some reason. Uh, yeah, I looked him up and I found an obituary from 1987 where he had been found in the back of a trunk somewhere in, I think, South Boston.
Oh man.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, this fella meant island ends. And then I was like, what do I do with this book? Should I try to return it to his family? And then I thought, no, they probably
They might
wanted
have been the
to.
ones to donate it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, there was probably a reason that this book was passed on whenever it was. And I was like, I don't think I need to seek these folks out with a sad story from the 1980s. Um, so it's just this odd little curio that lives in my house where I'm like, oh, this is my children's book from a person, from a murdered individual. Um, so I hope their spirit is out there somewhere and appreciates that I'm keeping their childhood book safe. I mean, it must have been a hand me down. Um, because there's, like I said in the notes, there's a name and the name matches some of the other information in the book. So it must have been passed down in this person's family before eventually getting donated and ending up at that craft fair. But it's just one of my favorite weird curio items in my house.
Cool. That
Yeah.
reminds me of actually there was a joke in a podcast I used to listen to called 8-Bit Book Club where they would read old video game books and they got a Super Mario Brothers themed like Sonic the Hedgehog Choose Your Own Adventure that they were going through forever, and it haunted and plagued them for like several years on the podcast. They just could not beat this book, but it had one of those nameplates in it, and they joked they were like, "This person could be one of our listeners," and one of them was just like, "This person was brutally murdered, and this book is haunted," and that is really just what makes me think of like your story completely. Like, no,
Oh yeah.
no, this is a murder victim's book. It was donated, and they were like, "That's gruesome," but here you are telling that story. So,
Yeah. I hope justice was ever gotten for that person. I wasn't able to find a lot of information on them. And in fact, I found that obituary years ago, the first time I looked it up, which had to have been, it was when I was living in Jamaica Plain, which was over 10 years ago, I think, at this point. And I couldn't find that same obituary today because I was looking it up. Because like, literally, it was just this morning that my daughter pulled this off of my shelf and reminded me of this. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit more searching. That could be a spin-off podcast, searching for justice for this book.
how did you start your murder investigation podcast? A book.
A book. I got it at a craft fair.
Oh, okay. Well, that kind of leads into our topic this week, which is spooky New England. But
Ooh.
before we get into our topic, I'm a little thirsty, and I am drinking a craft cider this week. I figure, it's Thanksgiving season, it's cider season, and I picked up a bunch of fun flavored ciders for Thanksgiving, and we got like the apple pie ones and stuff. But the one that really stood out that was amazing is the strawberry rhubarb flavored one by Embark Craft Cider Company.
Ooh, that sounds really good.
It's too good, if you know what I mean. Like it goes down too easy. It's not a sweet or a dry cider. It's like right there in the middle. And so it's got like a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of dry tartness. It is really tasty. Um, I like ciders to begin with. I love strawberry rhubarb. So it's perfect and it's dangerous and I can't recommend it enough. It was kind of an impulse buy. I almost didn't get it because it didn't fully fit like the Thanksgiving set up. I was like, there's like a cranberry cider or something, but I love strawberry rhubarb enough that my wife and I were like, we're gonna get this one, and I'm very happy with that decision.
Oh, that sounds real good. I'm gonna look for that one.
You should. It's pretty widely available. I sent it to my brother who lives in Pennsylvania, and he said he had recently had it and it was very good. So, you should be able to find it up fairly not that far north of me if he can get it all the way down in Pennsylvania. They are located in New York State, so
Hmm.
I think
Sounds
we're in
good.
their region.
Nice. Well, I am not actually drinking this. I just finished. I think we finished off a bottle yesterday. Uh, Tonight I'm going to be paying tribute to the Plymouth Bay Winery's Colonial Red. Um, Plymouth Bay Winery is a winery right here in Massachusetts, in Plymouth Bay, where Massachusetts got its start. And it is the Colonial Red. It's made with grapes that were native to this region that were cultivated in the 1830s. Um, Ephraim Wales Bull. They've got a lot of good information about this guy. And then the juice was developed by Thomas Welch, a dentist best known for creating Welch's grape juice. And if you take a sip of the Bay Winery Colonial Red, I will tell you, it tastes exactly like Welch's grape juice. Um, there's kind of a reason that the Concord grape is not used in a lot of wines, despite it getting used in an awful lot of grape juices. It tastes pretty much exactly like Manischewitz, um, which of course is a favorite of Jews, especially this time of year around Hanukkah time. It's Hanukkah as we're recording this. Um, and my wife absolutely loves it. So if you get a chance, check out Plymouth Bay Winery's Colonial Red. If you like grape juice, but you want to get drunk, Colonial Red.
I used to get wine from the Pennsylvania Ren Fair is based on the grounds of a winery, and they actually make a
Mm.
Concord grape wine that is very, very much like Manischewitz, but is also very tasty.
If you like grape juice, I don't like grape juice. I'm not like big into grape flavoring. Like artificial grape, I can't do.
I mean, I'm not huge into it, but having a glass of it, like it's like a melted popsicle almost. It
You know
wasn't
what's?
hmm?
Hmm? No. Oh no, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, so like it's not something I want a lot of. It was almost like a dessert wine. Like it's kind of like a palate cleanser. But I like grape juice. But again, I never have a big glass of it. I always have like one of those like juice glass sizes of it.
All right, we're talking about local legends this week.
We are. A while ago, I don't even remember why I was researching this a while ago for the podcast, but I came upon a ton of local legends. I think I mentioned in an earlier episode, like one of our early episodes. And so I thought, well, originally this episode was supposed to come out for Thanksgiving. And before, we had to postpone for 2 weeks. So it was supposed to be kind of colonial pilgrim type of New England legends to go with it. But spooky legends are spooky legends. It was cool to learn about my new state because I'm not from Rhode Island. So I got to learn about a bunch of new stuff. What about you?
Well, I since I've been living in Massachusetts, I have also really loved learning about Massachusetts lore. One of my favorite podcasts, and I've probably mentioned this on this podcast, is the Lore Podcast. In one of their early episodes, they did a story about the Bridgewater Triangle, which really piqued my interest about the Bridgewater Triangle, which is kind of Massachusetts' answer to the Bermuda Triangle. Um, that's what I found. I found some interesting stuff I'm happy to tell you about.
Okay, excellent. You want to go first, or you want to
Yeah,
finish
I could
out?
take it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Bridgewater Triangle, which is a section of Massachusetts that is about 200 square miles if you look on a map. And of course, there's never any like real true way of saying how big these kind of nebulous paranormal sections are. Compare that to the Bermuda Triangle out in the middle of the ocean, which is estimated to be somewhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million square miles. So not as big, but I think it gets the job done for us here in Massachusetts. The term was first coined in the 1970s, and it kind of is an area that encompasses a wide array of paranormal activity. Now, you can hear a lot about UFOs happening there. People say they've seen UFOs. People say that there are cryptids, everything ranging from some little creatures I'm going to talk about in a bit to Bigfoot. And in fact, I have family members who've claimed to have seen Bigfoot while out hunting in Massachusetts. Everybody's entitled to believe what they want to believe. I did watch a couple of documentaries on YouTube. I'm gonna put documentaries there in air quotes. Um, since I think that their their citations may be a little bit dubious, but if you want to learn about the Bridgewater Triangle, definitely go onto YouTube and search for some documentaries about it, and you'll find a lot of very enthusiastic folks going to tell you about it. Um, the thing that really caught my interest, Steve, when I was researching for this week, is the legend of the Pukwudgie. Have you ever heard of a Pukwudgie?
No, I have not heard of a Pacquijo. What is a Pacquijo?
A Pukwudgie is a Algonquin creature of legend. So it is a Native American legend. I learned about it a little bit on native-languages.org. So check out that website. Um, so it belongs to a number of different Native American tribes that are up and down the East Coast. Um, Around here in the Bridgewater Triangle was home to the Wampanoag tribe. And Pukwudgie can be kind of described, it looks like a little humanoid creature. It has kind of grayish skin and big ears, and all of the images I've seen of it, the hair kind of resembles a porcupine. So it looks almost like a combination of a gnome and a porcupine. They're weird little things. And they're typically, or through most of the Algonquin nations, have a reputation being a well-natured trickster, but kind of unique to the Wampanoag. The Pukwudgie has more of a reputation of being um, mischievous in a negative way, to the point that they kind of trick people into maybe tripping off a cliff or hurting themselves or just getting lost. So, kind of in this area, the Pukwudgie is more of a kind of a negative spirit, I guess. They became better known, I think, to the international world in recent years because in the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them series, the American Hogwarts. I don't know. I haven't watched any. I'm not a Harry Potter person. I don't know much about them, but I know that the American version of Hogwarts, one of their houses, was the Pukwudgie house. So they've gotten a little bit more notoriety in the last couple of years for anybody who I guess have seen those movies, but I don't think those movies have done particularly well.
They weren't very good.
No, you seen them?
I saw the first one, and the ending really angered me. And everything I know about the second one makes me glad I didn't watch it because they ruined every character.
Fair enough. So Steve is not recommending the Fantastic Beasts series. Sorry, JK.
Sorry, should have stopped at 7.
Um, so Pakwiji in Algonquin translates to people of the wilderness, which makes sense because they live out in the woods. Um, and I was able to find a pretty fantastic children's book from the 1980s by Gene Fritz. Gene Fritz was a children's author of some note. She died back in 2017, but one of the books she wrote in the 80s is The Good Giants and the Bad Puckwudgies. And I was able to find a copy of this on the Internet Archive. So if you look online at archive.org, you'll be able to find a copy of this. It's beautifully illustrated by Tomi de Paola. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I hope I'm pronouncing Pacquijo correctly, because I am not 100% sure that I am. And this book details the history, or it details the legend of a giant named Maushup. I definitely am not pronouncing that right, but he's a Native American giant who lived among the Wampanoag people in this legend in what is now Cape Cod, and he protected the Native Americans there from these mischievous Puckwudgies who would do things like turn into mosquitoes to bite them, um, or turn into fireflies and confuse people. And it's a beautiful legend, and it's a beautiful book. I don't think it is in print any longer. But again, you can find it online. You can find used copies online. And I definitely recommend it. It was a beautiful read and a good children's story. You don't see nearly enough Native American literature made available to children, so I really appreciate that it exists at all.
Awesome. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
surprised with my Rhode Island lore. I didn't run into really any Native American lore in my spooky stories. Maybe there just wasn't spooky lore.
You know what? I think it's a big problem of just when people came in and colonized, so many of these stories just weren't passed down or they weren't given any real credence. So in the back of this book, so in the last pages of this book, Jean um, describes the work that she had to do to get hold of this information, which was basically like going through a lot of different accounts and just finding fragmented old legends that had been collected about the Cape Cod area to put the story together, because it's not I just don't think there's just not enough comprehensive collections of Native American tales. So you lose such amazing stories like the Puckwudgie. So, I only know it because I heard about it on a podcast, and now like again, because it's part of the Bridgewater Triangle, there's a lot of people who talk about it, but so much of that is, you know, obviously it's a cryptid, it's a local legend. So you're not going to get a lot of like truthful, factful information. You just have a lot of people running around in the dark going, "Oh my god, I saw a monster! I saw a monster!" and it's no good. So it's really hard to kind of narrow down the good legends that you can pass on. So I was really glad to find that this exists at all,
I
and is made in a way that's accessible to kids.
I did notice that with a lot of my legends too. If I looked up something that I found, I would find like five distinctly different accounts of the story. Because a lot of these are so old, they are being pieced together by different accounts and like different versions and like the oral history versus the written. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So there were certain events where like there is seems to be commonalities between all of them, but for a lot of them there are actual accounts of some of these. There's a graveyard for one of them, and they still don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like it's still not 100% sure what exactly happened.
No, and I mean it's one of those things you take for granted right now, that so much of what you want is available to you. And that is an incredibly new phenomenon. But then again, like think about what I was saying. Going back to just when I was talking about that book in my collection, I had seen that obituary years ago. When I went to go look for it again, I just couldn't find the link. And that link might just be gone, and that information could just be gone, or it could be so much harder to get a hold of now. And so if I wanted to find out more information about this person, it's going to be so difficult to gather together. And then when you think about like these old ancient legends and how those stories were passed down, it's that times 1,000. Especially with a Native American story, like those groups of people were destroyed, broken up, and moved away. Like so many of their stories have been lost. It's amazing that anything survives.
Yeah. And it's so funny because we're such a young country comparatively for us to have lost this much when like you if like I have a book that I read as part of a source material for this called Spooky New England. And
Mhm.
the introduction by the author is actually kind of cool and it relates because it starts off with them being like, so I was in England, like England proper, not New England. And like, there are just like 1,000-year-old ghost stories that everyone in the area still knows by heart. And in America, ours are several hundred years old and they're so fragmented because
Mhm.
America like shunned that type of stuff culturally and didn't keep the records and X, Y, and Z, and it was like this weird movement away from that and just how hard it is. And that's actually why they wrote this book because there aren't a lot of written accountings of what happened during that time period.
Have you ever heard of the Tiffany problem?
It sounds familiar, but tell me about it.
The Tiffany problem is the name Tiffany.
Oh, yes, it sounds ultra modern, but it's
It
actually a proper ancient name.
Yeah, it's a name with a medieval origin. So I was following a YouTuber, CGP Gray, if anybody wants to look this up, and he did a whole deep dive trying to discern exactly when that name Tiffany first pops up in medieval literature,
Well, it's
and he
actually
ran it
short for something, I believe, right?
Tiffania, I think it was. Originally it was Tiffania, and then it was shortened to Tiffany over time. But
Mm-hmm.
like the spelling of modern spelling of Tiffany with an F rather than a PH, um, was what he was looking up, and what he ended up finding was everybody who cited that fact of it being a medieval name. He basically followed all the sources back. It was like the source was some ancient poem. He was able to follow the sources back and then realize that the poem had been misattributed at some point in like the 1700s. So he couldn't actually trace it back to like proper medieval times, at least for a while. I think eventually he was able to, but he ended up going down some pretty astounding rabbit holes, trying to prove the Tiffany problem one way or the other. It really goes to going back to my point. Um, it shows you just how easy any information can be confused or lost.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, I'd forgotten about the Tiffany problem, but it is interesting that, like, despite being a medieval name, if you drop it in, like, Game of Thrones, it'll just destroy immersion.
Yeah, it doesn't sound right. It just doesn't hit their ear right. Yeah, so I was very glad to learn about the Pukwudgie, a Massachusetts and I guess Northeast in general cryptid. There's still stories today about people saying that they've seen them or they've been tricked by them. I think on that episode of Lore they talked a lot about people who followed them into the forest, um, who then eventually, I guess, found their way back out because if you say that, oh, I followed the Pukwudgie into the forest, you have to survive to tell that tale. If you're
It's,
in the Bridgewater Triangle and you run into a little half person, half porcupine, don't follow it. It might be trying to trick you.
but apparently there's a chance you'll get out.
Yeah, I mean somebody had to. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these stories.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rhode Island has a bunch of cool, notable stories that I'm gonna jump over just really quickly. We have the house from the Conjuring franchise that originally
Ooh,
inspired that
spooky.
story. That's actually near me and currently for sale. Um, I asked Sam if he wanted to buy it with me and start a haunted bed and breakfast, but he said no.
I just don't
So
think we have the money. Also, I'm afraid of ghosts.
it's apparently still incredibly haunted. So valid. But yeah, we've got that nearby. Also, one of our local legends in my part of Rhode Island is the story of a man named Fingernail Freddy, who is the inspiration for Freddy Krueger.
Was just gonna ask.
Yes. Um, he lived, I believe, back in the 1800s. No, had to be earlier than that, I think. His house was burned down by, various reports, but the consensus seems to maybe be like street youths. And uh,
Darn those street youths.
his kids died. He escaped severely burned and went and lived in the woods and then would torment. Grew his fingernails incredibly long and would torment people in the woods who disturbed him or made too much noise. So, he would hunt and kind of like taunt people, like, Freddy's gonna get you. And that's where that came from.
All right, I'd watch the Freddy Origins reboot.
Right? So, like a horribly burned man who goes to live in the woods after surviving a fire and just becoming a complete misanthrope because people burned down his house and killed his family. We have another one, because, burning down houses and killing families was apparently a. Witch burnings was a big thing in Rhode Island, not Massachusetts.
Hmm.
A lot of stories of burnings. There is a story of a woman in white in Rhode Island who was a woman named Dolly Cole. She has many different stories saying who she was, but she was rumored to be a witch.
Hmm.
And in an attempt to rid themselves of her, the village burned down her home, except she wasn't home. Her daughter was home, so her daughter was burned alive. And she ended up eventually being murdered in the woods near that area and is apparently a woman in white in those woods. So we have like a lot of like if you watch like the show Supernatural, a lot
Hmm.
of like the urban legends that they deal with are pulled from like the woman in white and stuff are pulled from this state and a lot of like weird little legends like that. And they've just
Ooh.
been misattributed to different parts of America. Um, so then we have two other big things that Rhode Island is known for. The first one is we had uh, both a werewolf and a vampire panic in Rhode Island throughout its history at different times, uh, which is very cool. There was the werewolf panic came first though. That was back in like early settlement of Rhode Island times. A lot of French actually came down and brought legends of like werewolves and stuff. But some of the legends say they came here like because they were fleeing like a werewolf's curse, and there were no werewolves in Rhode Island. But then there is this story of do you know what a devil's hole is? It's like a hole in the ground that goes.
Devil's Soul.
Yeah, it's a hole in the ground that goes all the way down to hell.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah,
Say I do.
there's like that horror story trope where like there's a grave in a cemetery and it's bottomless and it goes all the way down to hell and one night a year like the devil comes out or that generic horror movie type of trope.
Sure,
Uh
every town has its Devil's Hole. I think every town has that same urban legend.
I think we have the alpha one from what I can tell in my research. So back
Ooh.
in when Rhode Island was first being settled, there was a lot of people that were just moving out to the woods and they didn't have any clergy or anything. Like clergy once a month would have to like kind of go out to all the homesteaders and do confession and stuff, and that's how people did it. So eventually, this town, Woonsocket, which is where I work, finally got a priest signed there, and they wanted to build him a church. And so there's this story basically that he was visited in the night by an angel who was like, I'm gonna give you a horse in the morning that can pull any cart. and you're going to use it to haul all the stone for this, but you can never take the bridle off. And so in the morning, he finds the horse, and it is clearly the devil. Like, the horse is the devil has been chained up by God and is going to be forced to help them uh, build this church.
Okay,
And
I have a pretty clear picture of this in my mind, and it's very funny.
so the priest is like, "All right, so you can use this horse, and he'll carry any load of stone, but you can never take the bridle off." And this goes good for like 3 weeks until someone takes the bridle off. And of course, the horse goes crazy, runs to the river, dives into a giant boulder, and just leaves us a devil's hole going all the way back to hell, and they have to finish without him. And from that point on, anyone who took the road past that, horses would go lame, cartwheels would break. Like, that was like a cursed stretch of road from that point on. And the cool part of that I'm going to add from personal experience is, so no one's ever been able to like, there's like a whole bunch of YouTube videos of people
Hmm.
looking for exactly what part. We know the town area and we know the river that the rock was on, but like, people looking for this devil's hole that was apparently a thing of legend in the area for a long time. Like, people would avoid it. I actually drive over that river every day when I go to
Ooh.
work, and there are always cars broken down right there. And I've always wondered, like, what's this about? Like, why is everyone broken down next to this bridge? And so, if there is the Devil's Hole in Rhode Island, I think it's right next to that goddamn bridge.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
It's
I mean, it all
the
tracks,
the
right?
right town, the right river. There are perpetually cars broken down right there. It just works with the legend really nicely. So,
Right, add to that legend. We could put this squarely into that legend. You've just, I think, made an addendum to it.
yeah, it's still happening.
That's
It's
still happening.
it's like when you go on, you like Google a restaurant or something, and it's just like Google asks you questions about the place because you have more information than it does. It's like, is this on the right side of the road for our map? Like, are these the correct hours? It's like, is this road still cursed? I just want to check, like, yes. Like, still super
Straight up
cursed,
cursed.
Google. And so this Devil's Hole apparently leads to, is one of the reasons we have a werewolf mythology, because that's where all the werewolves came out of.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
So we had a werewolf problem in Rhode Island for a while that was fueled by what seemed to be a lot of French Canadian settlers coming down, but also the fact that we had a Devil's Hole, and clearly, if werewolves are going to come out of somewhere, it's the Devil's Hole.
Not out of French Canada.
Not out of French Canada. They left the ones in French Canada, came here because it was a werewolf-free zone, and they were like, "You opened a hole to hell? That's how you get werewolves. That's just gonna get you more werewolves."
Ah, yes, we are sending all of our werewolves to you. I don't know if that sounded French.
So
It definitely didn't.
I think Rhode Island solved their werewolf problem by introducing a vampire problem. That
I think that's a terrible plan.
I mean, I'm just saying, suddenly werewolves were replaced by vampires, and it's that whole old lady who swallowed a fly with cryptids.
I was about to say.
So we got rid of so you got rid of werewolves, but now you've got vampires.
It's a lateral move at best.
It is at best a lateral move. So there is a famous uh, part of Rhode Island history is the New England vampire panic. It was a real part in history.
Hmm.
The most famous vampire was Mercy Brown. Her grave is
Hmm.
still there. People still visit it. That's also in a nearby town in Exeter, Rhode Island. So vampires were a really, really big deal in Rhode Island back when tuberculosis was a big problem.
Makes sense.
People thought that tuberculosis was the spirits of the dead feeding on the life of the living. It also doesn't help. So, Mercy Brown was a girl who people decided were responsible for the deaths of two members of her family who died of consumption before she died of the same illness. And uh, I think it was like a year later, her father and family doctor exhumed her body and found that there was still blood in her heart. And so she was clearly a vampire and had to be like burned post mortem.
Mm.
And so New England had a whole vampire panic, not just because of that mythos, but because Rhode Island is very soggy. We have a
Mm.
lot of inner waterways, a lot of underground rivers, and people were not being buried deep enough
Mm.
underground for a long time, and bodies would resurface a lot.
Oh no, what an
Which,
awful problem.
yeah, so people would see like disturbed graves, bodies, like hands crawling out of graves, things like that. So we had a huge vampire panic here for a long time. And there are scientific explanations for why Mercy Brown had blood in her heart and stuff. There's a bunch of like cool breakdowns as to like how that worked with the disease and all that, but it did put in a lot of fun Rhode Island folklore, and it is a pretty cool read to just read about the huge vampire panic that was honestly in the late 1800s, so it was like 130 years ago. So not that long ago.
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's just like, oh, yeah, that's almost modern times when you think
Yeah.
about it.
That's steampunk era. That's post Civil War. Electricity existed in 1892.
It's like that's like 1.5 human lifetimes ago. Maybe not even. Like it's really not that long ago when you think about it. Like the late 1800s.
My great grandmother, who was alive till I was in like college almost,
Mhm.
was born. She lived to 101, but she was born in 1898. Like,
Oh man, my great grandmother as well.
yeah, so it's just like I knew a woman who was alive during the vampire panic.
Yeah, no, I mean it's the grave of Mercy Brown. That's actually been on my kind of like New England to do list for a number of years because I had heard that story years ago, and I've always wanted to go check that out. Um, and I think you've remotivated me to do that. Um, yeah, it really is not that long ago when you think about it. Just the length of time that people live. Some people live to be very, very old. Um, it was only in the last couple of years that the last person who was alive during the 1800s died. And that's something that only happened in the last maybe 5 years or so.
Yeah,
So it's a modern story. It is not that far in the past.
yeah. Mercy Brown specifically is referenced in an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Shunned House, and it was also
Mm.
featured on Lore in 2015.
That's where I first started about it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I listened to a lot of lore when it first came out. That show was really good.
But yeah, I still need to listen to Lore. I haven't caught it, but it's definitely on my list.
It's another one of those. It was one of those podcasts that has now been running for a very long time. So there's a pretty huge back catalog, but it's also you can kind of pick and choose as you listen. Find the ones that are interesting to you.
Yeah, so check out your local lore is what I have to say. I mean, the podcast too, but there's probably a lot of cool local stuff near you. I remember really liking a lot of my local lore growing up in Jersey. And reading through this, like, the Smithsonian actually has a really good article on the New England vampire panic. That's just a fun read. And it's a good, it goes into like, how does this happen? How does a modern society have a full on vampire panic?
Mm. I'm really excited about our local library in my town has been closed for a while. It closed pre-pandemic because they were doing construction, and then the pandemic exacerbated the length of time it was going to take to finish it. And they're just finally finishing it up. Because I want to do some like local deep dives in this area, because every town in New England can trace itself back to like the 1600s. There's so much here.
Yeah. We when we first moved here, we just went to like the local park down the street, and there was just plaques like going down the park about the entire history from like colonial times. And I was like, this part of the country, man, like it knows exactly
Mhm.
who it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is where things started.
I
Or,
will
I mean,
say,
this is where Europeans started in America. Obviously there were a lot of people here before then. Like I was talking about, like people forget that.
so I sent you this. I want to mention on the podcast though. So I read this spooky New England book, and they kindly created a map of New England with all the sites on it.
That's right.
And they forgot to print the map part. The compass is there, the state names are there, and the legend and all the sites are there, but there's not a single part of the actual map indicating where
I
anything
forgot.
is on this map. And there were several things like that on this book. It's like
That's
this
so weird.
it's such a first draft. I find it to be incredibly funny. Now, this book is interesting because this book didn't give a clinical look at any of these. She actually gathered as many of these stories as she could and wrote them as stories.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so like they are actual, like literal, like one of them is a man being chased by a werewolf, and it's that legend, but it's from like the point of view of that person or things like that. Like, so it's interesting. It's not exactly what I was looking for when I bought it, but I think it would be good for kids because it kind of like drops, it merges the fact with the fiction and lets them immerse themselves in an actual book,
Hmm.
but still give them a lot of the threads of information about the area. But otherwise, there's lots of good little resources, and honestly, like there's town historians that would probably love to talk to you about local stuff.
Be fun. Find
That
your local antiquarian.
Yeah, I mean,
They
my
need
local
someone to talk to.
my local library has programs like that where
Oh, really?
yeah, like there's like the historian that'll come through and talk about different things. I'm sure if I asked him about, you know, this or that, he'd either tell me there's a month slated for that, or he would, be a good resource.
All right.
Yeah,
You've given me a goal for when the library reopens.
fantastic. All right. Well, I believe next week will be our Christmas episode, so tune in for that.
Spookiest holiday.
Awesome. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Steve,
I'm Sam.
and have a great night.
See you next time.